Way, way back in the long-lost history of web development, also known as the 90s, people used tables to create layouts in web design. And at the time, it was really forward-thinking and great because tables, you can essentially use grids and you can create layouts and sidebars and columns and yada, yada, yada. It makes sense, right? But as web development started to progress, we started to get rid of that method because it's not very semantic. You're using a table for everything other than tabular data. Tables are meant for tabular data, for spreadsheets, for taking like a contact information, your name, email, address, database information. That's what tables are for, tabular data. So nowadays, we don't use tables for layouts. At least you shouldn't. And there is a very specific use for tables. And like I've been saying, it's meant for exclusively tabular data. Now, which brings me to what we're going to be doing in this specific lecture. We're going to be using Bootstrap to create tables. Now, what's cool is that tables, again, kind of like forms and inputs, they by default look pretty ugly. But Bootstrap, by default, you just throw in a couple quick classes and your table is incredibly beautiful. Your tabular data is displayed in a sophisticated and refined, beautiful table. Now, let me show you what I'm talking about. Create a new file in your Bootstrap directory called tables.html. Go ahead and add the basic kind of Bootstrap HTML, all the head content and everything like that. Make sure you have all that up to snuff. And if you want, you can go ahead and download the final file and delete the content and just follow along. And we're going to add a div with the class of container, page header, Bootstrap tables, level 1 heading, paragraph with the class of lead. Make tables cool again. Because they were cool and no longer are cool. But now they are cool again because of this course. Anyway, what we're going to do now is we're going to just add a table. Now, let's start off by adding a table tag. For those of you who have never made a table in HTML before, welcome. Table, you got a table head, and then here you have th tags where you'd have, you'd need to start with a table row. That's very important. And then you have a th tags for table head. And we're going to say name. I'm going to copy that, paste it 2 more times. And whoops. Name and then email. And then let's add another one in here, city. And then we're going to go outside of our table head here, and we're going to go a table body. Now this is the semantic way of coding a table. Table row. And inside of our table row, you have to have table data tags, TD tags. So Jim, let's go with fake email here, jim@email.com, and Jim's city, let's say Yellowknife, my hometown. That's not how you spell it. There you go. And I'm just going to copy this row, paste it 2 more times, and change the information just so I'm not typing out stuff I don't need to be typing. Breton, and this is going to be bgirl at whatup.io. Whatup.io, and she is going to be from Kahului in Hawaii. And then Lenny, she's going to be Lendog. There we go. Whoops. Lendog at website.com. Jacksonville. Okay, so save that and let's just see what it looks like by default. Let's see if Bootstrap does anything cool. Nothing. Other than remove the styles, which is actually smart because the default styles for tables are really hideous. And let me just show you. I'm just going to remove the Bootstrap style sheet here. And let me just show you what tables look like by default. They just have a weird kind of ugly layout. This is the table headings are centered and it just doesn't look very good. Now the Bootstrap styles don't do too much. They change the font sizes, make sure everything is left aligned, but nothing really happens until you add a class to the table called table. Now watch this. All your work is done. You have your table. Now let me just move that border. There you go. You have your table and it looks much nicer. It's full width. It's got a nice little border and it's bold in the table heading and everything looks great. But there are other things you could do to make this table even nicer. Add some more classes here. For example, table-striped gives you striped columns or rows, rather, on every other row. So if I had more rows, you'd see they were striped, so you can see the data easier. You could do a bordered table because currently there is no border. So let's say table-bordered. So now you have a border if you want a border around your table. You can also do hover effects on each of the rows. All you need to do is say table-hover. Hover over the rows, there you go. And it only does it on the rows, not the table head. And you can only really see it on the non-highlighted one because it's about the same color, but you see the idea how it works. You can also do a condensed table. So table-condensed. And that shrinks the table a little bit if you don't want a really kind of open, well-padded table, if you want it a bit more condensed for your layout. And there's also contextual classes that they call. Basically, in different contexts, you want to be able to display different information using CSS. So if you wanted a row to be a different color or a cell to be a different color, you can easily do that by adding different classes to each row. So for example, let's say for this row, actually no, I'm going to do it in the table body. Let's say table body, I'm going to have the class success. So if you want to show, there you go, success. We have a green row. You could also do that to a specific cell rather than the entire row. So we could say class, let's go for info. And info will give it a different color, so you can see it's blue. We can also do things like warning and danger. So let's do this row just to have the class of danger, and it will highlight it red. And then warning, I'll do it on another cell over here. We'll say, not this one, we'll do it in the center. We'll say class warning. And there you go, it's yellow. So you can play around with the different contextual classes when they're appropriate. It's not just to make your table colorful. And then you can also do other things with tables in the CSS, the Bootstrap documentation. They have tables here, and we basically covered what we just, what's in the documentation we already covered, but there's also a couple of extra things such as responsive tables. You just add the class of table responsive, and it makes them scroll horizontally on mobile devices. So let's just try it. Let's see what happens. Table-responsive. And refresh. I think we need to resize this. Now, I think if we had more content, it would actually allow me to scroll. But because it's a small table, it won't actually do anything. So anyway, that's how that, in theory, would work. Now let's talk about buttons and images. I've already created a file called buttons-images.html in the course files folder. Go ahead and download that so you can just have reference as we just quickly go over this. Instead of coding each individual one, I just want to show you the theory behind it so that you could see, because they're really easy to make. There isn't anything fancy, but I just want to give you the goods as quickly as possible here. So Bootstrap buttons, let me just open up the file. Here we go, Bootstrap buttons. Bootstrap lets you easily create beautiful, user-friendly buttons. So default buttons, let's go into our markup here. You can use the Bootstrap classes on A tags, button tags, and input tags. So like so, here are different tags. We have A, button, and input, and they have the class of BTN, and then BTN default, which gives you the button default style. And you can see this is an A tag, button, and input tag, and they look exactly the same in the browser. That's what Bootstrap does. And now button styles, you could do different button styles just by playing with classes. So Bootstrap suggests that you use the button tag whenever possible, if it's a button, rather than an input tag, because buttons apparently style better cross-browser with Firefox and all that stuff rather than inputs, which kind of can get a little funky sometimes. Up to you. So buttons, you can do the standard button, which is the button default class. There's also the button primary class. There's a success positive action color button, which is button success, button info, button warning, button danger, and then button link, which looks like a link. This should say link, and behaves like a button. So let me show you those in the browser here. So you have default, primary, success, info, warning, danger, and link. And they have their own, let me get rid of that highlight there. There you go. They have their own default kind of built-in styles that Bootstrap lets you do. And so they hover, they have active states, and they're all kind of built in, so you don't have to worry about any of that. Now there's also button sizes if you want your buttons extra small, small, or large. And those classes are very easy. Down here in our HTML, we have button sizes. button XS, so BTN-XS for extra small, BTN-SM for small buttons, and BTN-large for large buttons. And those, again, they look like this: extra small, small, and large. And you could use any of the button styles and any of the tags to be able to create these button sizes. You also have block level buttons, where you can have the button be the full width of its parent, so a block. So here we go, block level buttons, we have BTN-block, and that's all you have to do. You just add the class in the group of classes that you've already added for your buttons. And that's basically it for buttons. I just wanted to quickly go over that because it's so easy. You don't really need to learn a lot. You just need to know those few styles, and then you can go out and already start using those classes. Now, images, again, very, very simple. There are a few cool things that you can do with images. You can do responsive images, and by default, they're non-responsive. So let me show you what that looks like. I can resize my browser here, and you can see the responsive image is changing size, but the non-responsive isn't. So you can see the responsive image is staying the full width of the container, and non-responsive is staying the exact width that it was by default. And so to create the responsive image, you simply have to give the class on the image img-responsive. And then the non-responsive, they don't have any classes. The other thing you can do is quickly create image shapes. So image rounded, image circle, and image thumbnail. Those look like this: rounded, circle, and thumbnail, which has kind of like an outline, like so. If you want to create image shapes and styles really quickly without having to do any CSS. And that's what's really cool about Bootstrap, is that you don't have to do too much CSS. Now, don't get me wrong, I love CSS. It's probably my favorite web language, but I don't want to do it where I don't have to. I want to do it for super custom things. I don't always just use the default Bootstrap styles. They're just there as a framework for me to play with. And that's what it's really there for. It's not there for you just to use verbatim and just create a totally Bootstrap style site. In fact, I have a lot of students asking me when I create a site, a course that's about or kind of focused on Bootstrap, like my Bootstrap to WordPress course, they wonder, are my sites just going to look like Bootstrap sites? Because I don't want them to, because they look bad. And the honest truth about that is that they only look bad when people who don't know what they're doing. Because anyone can go in, copy and paste the HTML and just call it a website, call themselves a web developer. But a true web developer and web designer knows how to customize it, so you would never know that it's actually a Bootstrap site unless you viewed the source and you could see the classes and recognized it from using it yourself. So those are the Bootstrap buttons, images, and we also played with tables. We're going to be doing more Bootstrap coming up. Hang tight. See you there.